Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here tonight. Yeah, hi. Thank you. I appreciate it. A response is a good thing. I appreciate that. It's cool. Um, Lesson 2 out of our probably 13, maybe 12. I'm not 100% sure. We are going to be in Lesson 2 tonight doing this topic of a life lost and found. And as I did it last week, I have pretty much decided we're just going to dispense with the slides and all that kind of stuff. And we're just going to talk. And hopefully there will be some things that come out of the discussions along the way that are worth taking some notes on. But it's not one of those topics to me where it just needs notes, and you need to really dig in and retain a lot of information here. We're going to do our best to make this more of a conversational class. So less structure, but hopefully still focused on what we're here to talk about. So, Life Lost and Found. This book that we have dispersed and have decided to kind of use as our jump-off text. First of all, for those of you who still don't have one, I have a few more. I think I only have 4 or 5 more on the way, but they should be here early next week. So next Wednesday night, I may be able to get one of these to you. But this, as you know, if you were here last week, it's 2 of our brothers in the Lord, basically just reflecting on their lives and the difficulty and the losses that they went through, and then reflecting on what the Bible has to say that can help all of us to handle loss and grief the right way. So that's kind of what the overall goal of this class is in terms of, we're going to spend 13 Wednesday nights talking about this stuff. What are we hoping to get out of it by the end? It's that we handle and we process grief and loss in a healthy kind of biblical way. So, to get us started tonight, I want to do a little Bible recall exercise with everybody, okay? And this is going to seem like the most random starting point ever. Bear with me, play along. I usually have some method behind what I'm doing, okay? Even if it isn't any good, I try, okay? So, Bible recall exercise to get us going first thing. Tell me what you remember about the story of Stephen from the book of Acts. Give me any one single detail. I'll take one detail from each person. What do you got, Jessica? Yes, the first of the disciples to be martyred. Okay, good. What else do you remember about him?
He saw Jesus as he was dying.
Yeah, it's this really special moment as he's dying, that he looks into heaven, he sees the Lord sitting on his throne, he sees God on the throne, and the Lord at his right hand, and talks to him. Mr. Steve?
He was most devout and faithful.
Yeah, exactly. So when they list off the qualities of the 7 men who are going to, that he's one of that group, he's devout and he's faithful, full of the Spirit. Okay, so there's a good one. Okay, good. What else? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, okay, so toward the end of his long sermon, which is Acts chapter 7, they cover their ears and they rush at him and they start throwing rocks at him until he dies of blunt force trauma because they don't want to hear what he has to say. Wow, that got real serious there, didn't it? Okay, what were you going to say, Miss Linda?
Well, kind of the same thing. He, under a lot of pressure, he basically gave a defense that was a history of the nation of Israel.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was going to ask at some point, does anybody remember what he actually preached about in Acts chapter 7? Because Acts 6 is the whole process of him being selected and then him defending Jesus and the Jews being upset. But chapter 7, all he does is tell them, this is the people you've been for centuries on end, and you're still the same. You still reject God. Okay? All right, give me one more, Randall. One more thing about it. Oh, yeah, exactly. Okay. Christ, when he was on the cross, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. Stephen, as he's being stoned, this is a magnificent moment of spiritual strength. What does he say? That's of a similar nature. Yeah. Father, do not charge this sin against them. Okay, or some version of that. Okay. It's really fascinating. Now, here's the question. How did Stephen's fellow Christians honor his life after he died? What sort of big celebration did they throw for this man who had gone out in a moment of true spiritual glory? What sort of thing did they do to honor him and to rejoice that he had gone into heaven?
They ran out of Jerusalem.
Okay, eventually. That's where the story goes next. Okay, I'm coming to that. What do? What sort of joy do they express at Stephen's triumphant entrance into eternity?
I draw a blank.
Oh, good. Somebody had the honesty to say it. Okay, good. Let's go to Acts 8, please. Acts 8. Can I get a volunteer to read verses 1 through 3 of Acts chapter 8? Go for it, Mickey.
Acts 8, 1 through 3. Saul was consenting unto his death. There arose on that day a great persecution against the church which was in Jerusalem. And they were all scattered abroad throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. And devout men buried Stephen and made great lamentation over him. But Saul laid waste the church, entering into every house and dragging men and women, committed them to prison.
Okay. Here's what's interesting to me about this. First of all, I know Dr. Luke, who's writing this, he has grand purposes in mind for his storytelling. So, verse 1, he introduces us to Saul of Tarsus. Verse 3, we're moving on with the story of Saul of Tarsus, and that will be big for him for the next lots of chapters. So he needs for us to track with Saul of Tarsus. However, he makes one brief moment to tell us how Stephen's death was processed by those who loved him. What was it? They made great lamentation over the death of Stephen. And I think this is interesting. Now, this is going to come up later on in class tonight, but here's the reason I think this is worth pointing out. Because Stephen, for sure, was one of those guys where you're watching him to the very end and you know he is going into glory, into Abraham's bosom on the other side. You know this. And do they celebrate for him going into glory? They mourn for his death. And that is a good thing. Okay? And that's back, now we're back to kind of the same track we were talking about with all this stuff last Wednesday night, that the Bible is not telling us we don't mourn for people. The Bible is telling us over and over and over again that because God values life and God values love, that the people made in his image, when life is extinguished and when love is taken away, we weep for that, and it's right that we do that. Okay? And Stephen's is just one of so many examples where that's the case. Okay? So that said, that's kind of our primer for tonight, to just be reminded the same thing we talked about last time, that grief is real, and yet there is hope. And also, hope is real, and yet there is grief. And that's kind of a guiding thought for us, that all of it goes together in the experience of this life. Okay, so that's where we're going. So let me give you a couple of things to think about that are kind of continuations of last time. And then for those of you who have the book and were able to take the time and read it, we're going to talk about some stuff connected to chapters 3 and 4 out of the book tonight. Okay, so you kind of know what to have set up and open and sitting around. Okay, Jean's going to lead us in a word of prayer, and then we'll get going with the rest of tonight's discussion.
Father, we thank you so much for this day. Thank you for this opportunity we have to come together and study your word tonight. It's hard times hit us in our life. We pray that we can reflect back on these lessons and be able to get through the hard times in life a little better. We ask you, Father, to be with Dan tonight as he leads the class, be with all the teachers here, and pray that you will be with all of them tonight. Give us our sins, I pray in Jesus' name.
And amen. Thank you, brother. Okay, so here's a question for you that I know you know the answer to, but humor me a little bit, please. 5 stages of grief. You familiar with this? You've at least heard the term, okay? Anybody know what they are? Anybody able to rattle them off for us? Amanda, have at it.
Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance.
Okay. So now that we have isolated those, thanks to the psychological, studies community, it's pretty easy to tell that every single person who experiences grief goes through those exactly the same way, in exactly the same order, in exactly the same time frame every single time, right? No. And that's one of the things that I wanted to get to last week, but again, I'm not trying to rush us through any material. So if you still have notes that you were taking last week, here's your next section. When we talk about grief being real, one of the very real elements to it is that it is an individual experience. Okay? Now, I use that word very carefully because I don't want to make it sound like grief is an isolated experience. It's individual to you, but it doesn't mean that it has to isolate you from other people, okay? And that's just something that I think is really important for us to think about, is that there are different ways to grieve and to process grief that can all be righteous, okay? And I think that's important for us to realize because the community aspect of Christianity is so intense in the Bible in the way that God talks about us as his people. The community connection, the things that we share, is meant to be so close that Jesus himself would say when his mama and his brothers are outside of a building and he's surrounded by his disciples, he says, "Who are my mama and my brothers?" These people, the people that believe in God and are faithful to him, they're my mother and my brothers, you know. It's that kind of intensity. And so when we live in that sort of a community and that sort of closeness with each other, it's really important that we have the grace to let other people process grief in their individual way. And then we pray that they will have the grace to let us process it in our way as well. Okay? So again, it's not to say that it isolates you, that when you're hurting, well, you're on your own until you've dealt with that. No, quite the opposite. But it is to say that the way you experience it is going to be individual to you. Let me just give you some examples that I know you've probably thought about, but just think about them again here. A young person grieves for the death of their spouse in a way that an older person is going to grieve, in a way that's different from in a way that an older person is going to grieve for the death of their spouse. Okay? It depends on the years, it depends on the closeness, it depends on whether it was expected or unexpected. Those are different, okay? It's individual. Children grieve differently. Like a set of 3 children will grieve in 3 different ways if one of the parents passes away or if the house is divided by divorce. All 3 kids will process it differently in some ways, okay? 2 siblings will have different ways of dealing with the emotions and the memories and the timing of grief when one of the parents passes away. That's been the case with me and my younger brother and my younger sister. One of us out of the 3 is long-term angry, is very much stuck in the anger phase, okay? One of us out of the 3 is very much in the, what was the final one? I've forgotten. Acceptance. One of the 5 of us is very comfortable in that phase. And then one of us still has flashes of denial at times. Right, and that's like today's update, okay? My mama's been gone for 3 years and 2 weeks. 3 years and 2 weeks. Two Wednesday nights ago was the 3-year anniversary, okay? So, but that's the today update, that there's all 3 of us that are in 3 different places in this whole process, okay? And that's just the case, that sometimes it takes a long time for us to become emotionally steady again. Sometimes we become emotionally steady for long periods of time and then it snaps, and that's okay too. Some people really like memorials and mementos and things like that. Some people do not want that, okay? I'm somewhere kind of in the middle because my mom is on my mind. I've had this out a couple of times recently, but this one is her Bible, and it's just really important to me, you know? I don't have a whole lot of stuff, and I don't spend a lot of time with the items that were connected to my mom, but a few of them matter to me a great deal. I think it's obvious why this is one, you know? But for some people, that's not an important thing, okay? And so all of that I think just is important for us to think about. Sometimes you're gonna have brothers and sisters that you see them cry, you know that this is a very heavy thing for them, and be gracious when you see that. And then sometimes you're gonna have brothers and sisters that you're gonna go, wow, I really thought he or she was gonna be a lot more torn up than they are. Yeah, it's just different. Again, it's not that you're alone in it. It's not that you're isolated in it. but it is that it's individual to everybody, okay? So what's the right way to process the varying stages of grief? Number one, and really the only, I guess, guidance on this, is we process it with our faith fully placed in God. And then after that, we be gracious with the people around us and let them process it individually. And be gracious with ourselves as much as we can, okay? Because we're going to process it individually as well. Okay, all right, that was that whole section. Any other thoughts on that, on the individual nature of it? By the way, for just a Bible exercise, you could go through all the different times that somebody passed away and it was handled differently in different situations. You know, we talked about last time about Absalom and how there were kind of two different responses to Absalom's death, even on the same day. Like there were the troops that were glad that the enemy of their king had been defeated, but then there is the father who is mourning the loss of his son. So there's two different responses right there, you know. And it's just one of those things. There's so many different factors that go into the different versions of this. All right, that's it. Okay, next section then. When we talk about grief being real, we also need to just accept that, which is kind of what I've been saying for the last class and this entire class, but just the actual acceptance of the reality of grief is an important thing for us. Let me throw this out here real quickly as a bit of Bible study. Can we go over to 1 Thessalonians chapter 4? I have heard, while you're turning over there, I'll just say this. I've heard several preachers and I've heard several Christians, and this may just be a southern thing, and it may be because we go to so many funerals in the South, okay? It's true. Everybody in town shows up to every funeral. There's an Alabama kid back there looking at me going, uh-huh. We do. Well, that's it. They last for a week and the food is delicious. And I'm sorry to say that, but that's the reason we go sometimes. That person could have been a scoundrel, but you know there will be poppy seed chicken, so you better go, you know? I'm just kidding, okay? I'm not that kind of person. I'm not that kind of person, okay? But anyway, but I heard this a lot because we went to a ton of funerals, and I heard so many preachers at different funerals that said, you know, when a Christian dies, those of us who are mourning for their death, we're just being selfish, you know? Because where are they? Well, they're in heaven, so we should be happy. And the only reason that we're sad is because we're being selfish. If we were really thinking about them, we'd be happy. Not true. Okay, it just isn't. And so if you've been raised on that, first of all, my first question is, did you ever hear anybody read that out of your Bible? You didn't, okay. And secondly, does it fit with what you have read in your Bible? And the answer is no. It really, truly doesn't fit. Now, I think the reason that we started thinking that, and this is a place where we messed up, we started with something that we thought was right and then we messed it up, was because of 1 Thessalonians 4. Mickey, I'm going to pick on the ASV for just a second, but I'm going to try to redeem it right after that, okay? Can you read the ASV for us in just verse 13?
13. We would not have you ignorant, brethren, concerning them that fall asleep, that you sorrow not, even as the rest who have no hope.
Okay, so in the American Standard Version, and in a couple of other versions, among which kind of the ESV, which is my favorite, as you probably know, but in a couple of different versions, it starts to sound like what he's saying is, we don't grieve. We sorrow not. Exactly. But see, even in that version, it sounds, and that's why I say I'm going to redeem it. From one reading of that, it sounds like it says, we want you to not be ignorant, brothers, for those Christians that have fallen asleep. We don't mourn for them like people who have no hope. No, not what it means, because it doesn't fit the rest of Scripture. So anybody reading by any chance from the New Living Translation? I know that one's a stretch and not common among us. You got it, Marcus? Okay, read it from the New Living Translation and see if this sounds and feels different to you. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Now again, if you really wanted to read it the wrong way, you could make it stop with, we do not grieve. like people who have no hope grieve. But that's not what it means. It's a comparative statement, not a contrast statement. He says we don't grieve like people grieve when they have no hope. Yes, we grieve, but it's in a different kind of way. Why? Because we have hope. And where does the hope come from? Read the rest of that section. It comes from the resurrection. That's what this is all about. And so that's what's really fascinating about that one opening sentence right there is I think we have done a disservice to Paul's wording when we say, now we don't grieve because we have hope and grief is just selfish. No. He says we don't grieve as people would who have no hope. We grieve, but it's in a different way because we believe in the resurrection of the saints. And that's what's really important to remember this. It's important that we accept grief and not just do everything we can to shove it away, which I think is what that is. I think it's our reflex to just get rid of it. And listen, we need to just be accepting of the fact that God has told us again and again and again, this is part of life. It's the worst part of life. And right up there with suffering, right? This is that kind of terrible part of life. But I am with you through it. Learn to accept that as part of how things are, and that's okay. Steve first, and then Miss Linda.
And if you continue on to verse 18, it says, therefore comfort one another with these words. If people weren't grieving, there wouldn't be any reason.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Okay, Miss Linda.
You're probably going to get there, but when Lazarus died and Jesus showed up at the wake, he grieved
Yes.
and wept.
Yep.
And he knew that he was going to raise Lazarus.
Well-
He still grieved and wept.
Well, then he was being selfish. Listen, when we get to glory, don't tell him that I called him selfish, please. No, you're right. You're right.
What's the light of this concept?
Yes, that's exactly right. And so that's the thing, y'all. It is okay. The Bible has so much permission for us to experience this. Chief among them, maybe, is the fact that Jesus himself experienced it, and just accepted it. Okay, so there's that. Did I get to all 6 things from last time that I told you I was going to? Did you, anybody that was taking notes? I don't know. That's okay.
They have 4 or something.
Okay, I know what the other 2 are then. Yes, sir. Frankie, what you got?
Yeah, so, I don't know exactly where it's at, but Jesus was telling somebody to come with him, and they said, well, we have to bury somebody. And
Yes.
He said, well, let the dead bury the dead and come with me.
Yes.
So what do you think, how does that fit into the...
I think it's a unique circumstance among the others. You know what I mean? And I don't think he means it as a statement about grief in general and about like those whom we've lost. But I think it was, if you look at where it is, it's at the end of Luke 9. It's the last 7 or 8 verses of Luke chapter 9. And I think if you look at it right there, basically what he's doing is like repeatedly, Luke is saying there were so many times where Jesus said, if you're going to follow me, that has to be everything to you. Now, here's the deal I think helps to make sense of that is for those who follow him, once you're following him, the people that are part of that, the love between those people, that's part of the deal. And so mourning for them is part of it. But in that context, what he's addressing is there's a guy who says, I would follow you, Jesus, but there's this other thing. And he says, whatever that other thing is, not good enough to get in the way. So
It's
yeah.
up there with hating your loved ones because you didn't follow Jesus. He doesn't really mean
Not in the strongest sense of that, but in the dichotomy, like between do you love that or do you love me? It's a wide gap. And that's what he wants, is he wants that gap absolute. So yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool. Okay, the other 2 were that there are real memories that are part of the grieving process. Okay? There are real memories that are part of the grieving process. And that is just one of those things that for me, I've experienced this, and I know that plenty of everybody else must have, that there are just times where something triggers a memory of somebody, and it, whether for good or for bad, those memories continue on, anyway, that matters too, and I think it's really healthy So this is kind of a double-sided piece of advice here. This is kind of a part A and part B. I think it's really healthy if you're the one experiencing those memories that you find someone who will have the grace to let you share them, okay, and let you engage that a little bit more so it can be processed. And then part B is for everybody, when there's someone close to us who wants to share that, let's have the grace to indulge them. Let's listen. Let's be empathetic and sympathetic. Let's be kind and listen. James said, be slow to speak and quick to hear. That's a good time to be quick to hear. Good listeners, okay? All right, and then the last one, number 6 here, for those of you that are still finishing this out, is that there is real hope beyond grief. Okay? For all the times that the Bible talks about people mourning, it may talk even more about all the ways that we have that hope that Paul talked about in 1 Thessalonians 4:13. We grieve, yes, but there is always hope for the resurrection, and that in whatever way it's going to be, God will put all things right. Now, that may not be our version of things, all things put right, but he will put them all truly right in the end. And that's a hope that keeps us going no matter what kind of losses we suffer or what kind of suffering we endure. That's one of those hopes that keeps us, or one of those ideas that keeps us going in everything. So those are the things that I wanted to finish up for last time. Any other thoughts about that? About any of that stuff so far? No? Okay. All right, perfect. So let's do a little bit of exercise with the book. Okay. I found chapter 3 in this book to be immensely helpful, mostly because of the spiritual perspective that it gives. I thought it was interesting that the author put his haunting question as being why, right? So this is the chapter where he's talking about having lost his wife, and that was only a handful of years after their oldest son had passed away suddenly. And the haunting question for him was why? Why is this happening to us again? Okay. I got to tell you, though, for me, as I read the rest of the chapter, the more haunting question, and the one that I want us to talk a little bit about tonight, was when he had the conversation. He talks about the conversation he had with his other son, and his son asked him, "Are you angry?" And what he meant was, "Are you angry with God?" That, to me, is kind of one of those questions I feel like is really difficult and is kind of a haunting thing. And I thought it was interesting that he answered that, at least in the book, with some discussion about Job. So with Job kind of in your mind, and with the chapter in the book kind of in your mind, let's talk a little bit about that. How do we process that idea of being angry with God? What are some good and healthy and spiritually minded ways to think about that idea?
The book, I think it was the first section after the Job section, but it was saying we shouldn't be angry with God, we should be angry with Satan.
Okay.
God allowed those things to happen to Job, but he was the one that caused it to happen.
Okay.
So viewing it through that
Yeah.
lens is helpful.
It is helpful. Yeah, it really is. It is helpful. I don't know if it takes in the full scope of the book of Job, to tell you the truth. But it's helpful as far as it goes. I will say that. Okay? All right. Other thoughts on this subject? Miss Terry?
I had this conversation with my father when my mom died, because he was mad at God. But he said he was mad because that wasn't the way things were supposed to be. He was supposed to go first,
Hmm.
because he was older and, in poorer health. But he said, as long as he didn't deny God, he thought it was okay to, as long as he worked through his anger.
Okay.
Eventually he did,
Okay.
but it took him a while.
So if you couldn't hear that, I'm going to grab what I think was the most important part of it right there, which was, he said, as long as he didn't turn his back on God, didn't deny him, that it was okay to be angry with that and to work through that anger. Okay? All right. Mickey, what were you going to say? And then Elisa, you're next.
Well, Job 9, I think Job reaches a real low point. He says some very harsh things.
Give us an example. Yeah.
In verse 20, for example, 20 through 24, he says, "Though I be righteous, mine own mouth shall condemn me. Though I be perfect, it shall prove me perverse. I am perfect, I regard not myself. I despise my life. It is all one. Therefore I say, he destroyeth the perfect and the wicked. If the scourge lays suddenly, he will mock. If the scourge slay suddenly, he will mock at the trial of the innocent. The earth is given into the hand of the wicked. He covereth the faces of the judges thereof. If it be not he, who then is it?
Yeah. Yeah. If you're catching it, there's a lot of accusatory sounding stuff being said right there. Like, hey, listen, you guys are all saying around me that God is fair and he's righteous and he does everything perfectly, but sometimes he takes out his anger on people like me. That's basically what Job is saying. And it's not right. So he does sound angry with God. All right, Elisa, then Marcus, and then Molly. Those are my last three. Okay, just sorry, but let's just,
I was just going to pretty much agree with what's been said, that I think the important thing is not to stay angry with God,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, God wants a real relationship with us,
Mm-hmm.
and it's pretty fake, in my personal experience,
Mm-hmm.
to pretend you've never felt angry and question God, because we know that he is all-powerful and in control, so it's figuring out, for me, it's been figuring out his will, he's sovereign, versus man's will, which has impacted my life. And why didn't you intervene? Why didn't you stop it? Why did you let this happen? And I think you have to wrestle through all that to have a real relationship with him, rather than forcing this little, can't question God, can't be angry,
Yeah.
just pretend it's all okay.
Yeah.
And that's not real. I think
Yeah.
God can handle it, and he wants us to be real with him. And there is anger as a part of the grieving process, and who can take that anger better than anyone. However, it is important to not stay there,
Yeah.
and I think we have to help each other
Yep.
with that as well. A lot of people helped me move out of that stage patiently and carefully, not rushing me.
Yep.
So it's, again, an individual thing, but we have to stay connected and help each other not stay in that place.
Amen. 100%. Marcus, what you got?
So, to the point about what Job was saying in chapter 9, he was wrong because he wasn't blameless. No one's blameless besides Jesus.
Yeah.
The only human being that ever walked the earth that was blameless.
Yeah.
So that's where he was wrong. But to Alyssa's point, because that's pretty much what I was going to say, was that the relationship that we have with God, and in Matthew, when Jesus is talking about, taking the yoke. My bad, I'm getting my words mixed up. I've been in the sun all day. But when he's talking about placing our burdens on him,
Mm-hmm.
my yoke is easy, burden is light.
Mm-hmm.
This is part of it.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to our emotions and our feelings, God wants to be part of that as well.
Yeah.
He gave us those emotions. and
Yeah.
feelings. So Job is just, all Job is to me is a testament of you can have these types of feelings towards God that we don't get to see in this depth.
Yeah.
Usually in the Bible.
Yeah.
But even Jesus, when he was about to be crucified, he had his question. He wanted
Yep.
to take that cup, take this cup away from him, if it be your will. But even Jesus, we see these types of different aspects of the relationship with God.
And the key to,
That's part of it.
yeah, well, and the key to all of them is that you can still be faithful in those emotions, right? Which is what we're talking about here. So, Miss Molly, what was yours?
Lisa said it better than I can really, but some things God don't cause.
Mm-hmm.
Because it, see, don't even attempt to blame God, but you get angry, you get mad,
Mm-hmm.
you anger. I don't even know if I need the word grief until we really start accepting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean,
It-
not that I've stayed mad all the time, but
No.
I've been mad a lot,
Yeah, well,
but.
so have I. And that's just between me and you. Don't tell the rest of them. Okay. Yeah, no, I know what you mean. It is interesting because chapter 9 is not the only place where Job talks like that. He does the same thing again in chapter 23, verses 1 through 9. He does the same thing in chapter 30, verses 19 through 23, just if you're marking it down, okay? And yet, here's the thing. Job is also the one who says at some point, though he slay me, I will hope in him. If he were to kill me outright, I would get to the point, I'm committed to the point of death, that I would still put my faith in him, that this must be right, even if I don't understand it, you know? That's really hard. I don't know if I had to say that out loud, but I did. That's really hard, you know? So Job has both sides of this for us, and I think we all understand that. We don't really get the luxury of only feeling one emotion at a time. Okay, and I think this is one of those places where we see nobody who faithfully served God really ever had that luxury. We just don't know everything about them in every single case. But in Job, we at least have this. We see this glimpse of it. Yes, Miss Terry?
These 5 stages of grief are not linear.
Yes, that's
You
so
know,
true.
Okay, you get through denial, and you get to anger, and then you get through anger, and then you get to bargaining.
No,
you
not
go
a-
back
no.
and forth. I've seen people, I know people all too well, that get stuck in one
Mm-hmm.
and need to go backward
Mm-hmm.
before they can go forward.
Yeah, it's very true. All right, well, let me give you a couple things to think about with Job, okay? And you can put these in the margins of chapter 3 or just wherever you're taking your notes. But a couple things to think about with Job. Number 1, is Job angry with God? The answer is yes at times. It's not the only emotion he has, but yes at times, okay? Number 2, is that wrong? No, if we handle it correctly, okay? And I know that it's possible to handle it correctly because you keep in mind when you get to the end of Job, chapter 42, verse 7, God speaks to Job's friends and he says, you guys need to hush. You have not spoken of me what is right like Job has. God says that even in the times when Job was angry, he handled that rightly. He spoke correctly very often, if not always, about God. Okay? So it is okay at times. And then the third one is this, and we said this when we studied Job back in November, for those of you that are thinking, this sounds vaguely familiar. Yeah, that's where it's from. When we studied Job back in November, we said this. Job does 2 things right, okay? Number 1, Job speaks the truth as he knows it. And number 2, Job always turns toward God, not away from him. Even when he's angry, Job turns toward God, never away from him, okay? And that's probably the most important thing to realize in our dealing with the same emotions and with the same processes, is that even when we're angry with him, let's go talk to him about that. Let's take that to him and take ourselves again and again and again to him to help process that. And not say, I'll be back when I'm calmed down, right? I'll handle this part of my life, God, you handle that part. If you said that same thing about anything else in your life, you would see the problem with it. You know what I mean? And that's why it's a problem here. We need to take even our anger and turn that toward the presence of God, okay? And just make sure that that's what we're trying to do as much as we possibly can. Okay, here I go. My mama passed away, as you know, as I said, 3 years ago. She had COVID, and it developed into pneumonia. And she and my daddy had it at the same time. And my daddy has some really serious health problems that are ongoing health problems. And so when we found out that they both had it, we all got worried for him. And so I talked to both of them one night on the phone, and they were both so sick, just laying on the couches in the living room, both so sick. And they were both struggling to breathe a little bit, both taking kind of short breaths, okay? But Mama's got so bad that they had to hospitalize her. And this is the story of what happened, okay? So they took her to the hospital. Her oxygen levels were so low. And they did a chest x-ray. She had pneumonia. So they started giving her the medicine immediately. But we have a family history of heart problems and lung problems in our family, okay? And no one really thought about that then, about the family history. We just thought it was COVID that had some pneumonia in it, so give her the same medicine everybody else gets, and it'll be fine, okay? It wasn't fine. It got out of control fast. And so they had her quarantined. She was by herself. She was lonely. And the last time that I got to talk to her on the phone, she was so scared. And I think she knew already. She was taking a breath, 2 words, take another breath, 2 words. That was all she could manage. And so anyway, they called us 36 hours later, and they said she wasn't going to make it. And we said, can we come in? And they said no, because it was COVID procedures. And we went to the hospital and yelled at some people and said, we can come in. And they said, okay, here's what you have to do it. So Caitlin didn't get to go. The kids couldn't come in. It was me and my little sister and her husband and my dad. We're the only 4 people that were there. And Mama was on a breathing tube, and she was completely unresponsive. And they told us maybe she could hear us, and so we talked for a long time. And we said all the things we wanted her to know. And then they had to remove the tube. And we watched her take 2 breaths on her own, and that was it. And I immediately started kicking stuff and yelling and raging. And I stayed mad pretty continually for about a year. I just lived with anger boiling under the surface for about a year. And I was immediately angry with God, because of all the reasons that you know, because the good ones shouldn't be those that go soon, and because he has divine providence. He can put the right people and the right medicine in the right places at the right times to fix stuff like that. He can do that. And he didn't. And I was mad immediately over that whole situation. And I was even more mad when my sister found out that she was expecting a little girl, because my mama didn't have any granddaughters. And that was only 3 months after she passed that we found out that baby was coming. And I was mad for my boys, because Truett's not going to have any memories of her at all. And that is the finest person I could have possibly imagined to fill his head with memories of her. And I was just so angry. And I still am some days. I'm still mad about some of that same stuff. But I have come more and more to be grateful for who she was, and to be grateful for the hope that 1 Thessalonians 4, Job, David's story with his son, Stephen's story, like all of these people that show where God shows in their life that there is hope past this life. I have come more and more to appreciate and be so thankful for that. And just to realize again and again and again, with more and more peacefulness and trust, that's how this place goes. We're stuck on this big old round blue rock for the time being, and that's how it goes. And someday it will be different. My favorite line from my favorite hymn, I have 2 favorites that are in equal competition for first place, okay? Favorite line from the It Is Well With My Soul is, Lord, haste the day when our faith shall be sight. When the things we believe in and hope in today will actually be in front of our very eyes. Clouds be rolled back as a scroll and all that, but the faith becoming sight. That's what I really look forward to the most. And that helps me to be angry and know that it's moving in the right direction. You know? And some days it's just like that. Okay? Okay. Thank you for listening. Thanks for talking. Thanks for sharing. I appreciate you all. That's it.